Hi, Blastpop here. Today I'm taking a look at 1916 Verdun Campaign of Attrition, a game published by CSL, Conflict Simulations LLC, and designed by Ray Weiss. Ray sent me a copy of this game to take a look at and peruse and do a video about, and I'm doing that today, and I will let you know that the opinions are my own, and that had no influence on my opinion of the game. This game traces its heritage, so to speak, from the GDW Series 120 series of games. As a matter of fact, the box itself is approximately the same size as the GDW 120 series games. It's a nice, strong little box and holds the components more than adequately. On the back of the box here, you'll see a sample of game pieces in play and a little bit of history about what the game is about. Some more samples of the pieces down here in the lower right. And the game scale is 1 turn per month, 12.5 miles per hex. And unit scale is 3,000 men per strength point and playable by 1 to 2 players. So it is solitaire suitable. The complexity is 7 out of 10. Looking through the rules, I think it might be less complex than that, but at least they're being upfront that war games are not a easy thing for a lot of people to play, and shows solitaire suitability 6 out of 10. Included besides the box is 140 half-inch counters, 22 by 17 map, 2 6-sided die, a rule book, and 2 player aid cards. So we have the rules, and it comes in at 16 pages. On the back here, you have some summaries for gameplay, basically what happens sort of in the order that it happens, sort of in the sequence of play. Your operations phase, your cost to activate units by corps. First page is a cover. This came to me in a package sent by a company called Blue Panther Games, which is a distribution house and printing house on print-on-demand style games, which CSL publishes. For those not familiar with that concept, the company prints copies as needed and sends them out to customers, so there's little way in terms of inventory and stock for the game publisher. So that is a nice benefit and keeps games in print for as long as the manufacturer wants to do so. So looking at the rules here, on your first page, inside of the cover, you have your table of contents, and it spells out all the various items in the game and where to find them on what page. Introduction, the game flow, or how the game plays. Explanation of terrain. Your sequence of play. It starts off with a German turn, which includes a build phase, an attrition phase, siege artillery phase, movement phase, non-phasing player reserve movement, combat phase, reserve movement phase, supply phase, operations phase, and it's the French turn, and essentially you repeat the same process. In the rules, you show your values of your units, the Germans, French, and the values are combat and ordnance points. And the backside is for the units that are dug in or entrenched. And there's no movement points on the units because everything except for cavalry, I believe, has 4 movement points, and cavalry has 6 movement points. Stacking is essentially 2 units from the same corps, or 2 non-infantry units, but may also stack by themselves. Plus, in addition to the 2 units from a corps, a unit that is an infantry can stack with them. You get administration points, and min points are very important in this game, in that it is used for attrition. It's used for attacks and movement, and they're expended, and you have a limited supply of them. The usage kind of reminds me of the old game, oddly enough, World War One by SPI back in the 1970s in terms of the use of the attrition points and the administrative points, I should say. And you expend them to not have to take losses and that kind of thing. Units that are in supply and communication won't be eliminated by being out of supply and when they take attrition. Now, what's interesting in this game is each hex on the map, you'll roll a die for each unit and consult each hex and consult the attrition table and see what happens to the units in the hex in question. And if they're in supply, they can expend administrative points instead of taking losses. Basically taking the losses from the country in question, whether it's Germany or France, instead of out of the hide of the units, so to speak. You have a build phase where essentially you can bring units into the game. You have a siege fire where you can attack the enemy forts like Fort Dumont. You have movement. You have a meeting engagement, which is essentially a movement in combat, a mobile combat. Once the defenders are presumably on the run. You have a reserve phase. You have two reserve phases, one for each player, and it allows some additional tactical options for both sides outside of the normal movement phase. You have entrenchments, river crossings, rail conversion. You have combat, and it's you have a bunch of different ratios. You have basically have your fighting strength points. You roll a die, and then you modify it by the artillery ratios. And the defender has Elan, and the Germans, as an example, decide to use flamethrowers in the attack plus artillery, and you come up with a result on the combat results table, and it can in disruptions, demoralization, and step losses. And the first step loss that a unit must take before it can retreat is to go from an entrenched side to its unentrenched side. So in essence, entrenched units have essentially an extra step when they're so entrenched. And then you can also convert some of that into retreats. And then, as I just mentioned, disruption, demoralization, Elan defense, which I alluded to. And then you have your setup. You have a free setup, and you have a historical scenario. And then you have some optional rules. Simultaneous siege fire, fog of war, and basically you can't examine enemy stacks. Verdun or bust, which is an interesting rule. In turn 2, if you use this optional rule, the German player gets to choose, looking at the map situation, whether he's going to win it by taking Verdun or not. If he chooses the Verdun route, where he goes dagger to the heart of France, so to speak, the only way he will win is if he takes at least one hex of Verdun. If not, he loses. You have designer's notes. Okay, what's notable here is the counters. Very nicely done. Traditional NATO style symbology for the most part, with some markers here, the French and then the Germans. And on the back side, you can see the units that are dug in. And it's this unit, for example, is a 6-4 on the front side. It's a 9-4 on defense. So not only does the unit gain essentially a step by being entrenched, but it also gains combat value. So that's important. The ordnance points are the second number, which are another way of describing artillery, and basically artillery points in each unit. and then you have your markers. Now, what's really interesting is these counters are very, very thick. Now, being print on demand, see if I can get this to focus a little bit better. These are like double the thickness of most counters you'll see in games. So much so that it reminds me of the old Battle Line games. There's, you can see right there how thick it is. The Battle Line games of the 1970s, they were really thick counters. Well, these are fairly similar, and they're laser cut. So there's, it can be cut to a thick depth with little concern or issue. Very nicely done. I like these. 2-player aid cards, which basically keep one for the French and one for the German. Fairly identical. And they keep track of your administrative points and your 10s and 1s, your force pulls, units awaiting replacements, and permanently eliminated units. Again, one for each player. Also included is 2d6. And here's the map. You have your 10 turns here. You have your combat results table. You have your siege fire table, your attrition table, your artillery ratio matrix, and then up in the upper right-hand corner, your terrain effects chart for both movement and combat. Looking at the map, there are no, that I could find, not at least included in my box, was any picture of what the terrain looks like for any given hex if you have some question as to what terrain is what on the map. But it's fairly obvious based on the limited number of types of terrain you have: clear, woods, upslope, road, track, rail, river, village, fort, and trench line. This is the trench line. Woods, rail, hills or upslope, as they describe it, river. Very nicely done. It has a painted sort of look to it. And Verdun is rung by a series of forts. And the famous Fort Dumo. And so it has almost like a 3D effect for the upslope or hills here. It looks very nice. Only minor quibbles from a person my age. I'm in need of new glasses right now, which I'll be getting shortly. But I find like the combat results tables and the other, like the siege table, a little bit small for my liking, but they're perfectly serviceable. There's nothing wrong with them. It's complete and gives you everything you need. And similarly, as far as the rules book's concerned, the font is a little bit small, but nothing in any way an impediment. Game looks like quite a bit of fun and looks like it's pretty playable in a fairly short time. Comes boxed, and I'm going to be giving this a go shortly. And I may be doing a video of a setup or a post-action after-action report, depending on how that goes. So I'm impressed. This is for a first effort of a new company. It looks good. I think they have some future in the business. Please comment, like, and subscribe. This has been a look at 1916 Verdun Campaign of Attrition. This has been Blastpop. Bye.